say. But it was a lot of fun because it's not just for the linguistic side. It was looking at, how does the name sound? How easy will it be for someone in another part of the world to be able to read it? Because a lot of names aren't translated. So using camel case, which is where you have a capital letter at the beginning and a capital letter in the middle of the word, usually two words combined, can be it used to be very difficult in other languages for them to be able to read it. Especially if someone forgot that middle capital, how do you parse the word to understand it? The whole therapist looking like the rapist. You gotta watch out for those things. But also how things sound and what kind of sounds would be more appropriate and for different areas and what colors, and it was just the greatest job. But I'm in the position where my funding for my position went away, so I'm looking as well. But I'm also starting my own kind of consulting firm in a way, it's just me, called Beyond Words, where my plan is to help branding and naming firms in order to help them figure out, what are good names, what are good products to be able to put out there that aren't going to offend an entire group. And especially with such a small world that even if you're releasing to the US, you don't, unless you are a religious association, you don't want to look like you're religious or look like you favor one religion over the other. Or you don't want to offend someone by choosing a name that might be associated with another firm or might be associated with an odd meaning, or even on a search might come up and it's a porn site, which, believe me, has happened. So, it's been an adventure. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I think the greatest thing about linguistics is that we do have so many options available to us that you don't necessarily get with other degrees. Because it's such a gamut. It's the most humane of the sciences and the most scientific of the humanities. I was going to be a math and English major, and then I found linguistics and was like, this is it. So I think that's it. So are there any questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, Laura.
Myself at the beginning of all this. I'm Laurel Sutton. My company is Catchword, and it's a naming and branding firm. And Deborah and I do very similar things in some aspects, and my company would be one of the companies that she would work for in terms of making sure that names, taglines, other things that we create would be acceptable to our audience. So, let's see, just checking the time. So, I'm a linguist. I put some of my background here. I got my BA in English and linguistics at Douglas College, Rutgers University, way back in 1985. And then I moved out here to do graduate work at UC Berkeley, and I got my master's in 1992. And I passed my PhD orals, and I never wrote my dissertation. So I'm still ABD, still listed in the department somewhere as being ABD. Graduate school was kind of tough for me because I had to work the whole time I was doing it, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs, and so I decided to get a job for a while I was thinking about finishing my dissertation. When I was at Berkeley, my 2 main areas were sociolinguistics and phonetics, and my dissertation was going to be about phonetics, and John Ohala was my advisor. So I got a job working at a naming firm through a friend who worked at a naming firm. Everybody has been saying how important networking is, and that's completely true. I would not have gotten that job had I not had a friend who had a job working at a naming firm. And I really loved working there, and I was amazed to find a job where where I could really use my linguistics in many different ways, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So I met some other people who worked there who also loved their jobs. We didn't like our boss very much. So in 1998, we left and we started our own company, Catchword. And I can't believe it's almost 20 years since we started that company. So what do? We're primarily a naming company. So when you see names of products, of companies, of services, usually someone has created that name, unless it's the founder's name. A lot of times you have to hire a naming company to come up with an interesting name, because it's very difficult to find a name for a company or a product that is both appropriate, that is correct for what the product is, but also available. So someone else isn't already using it, the trademark is free, or there's a domain name available for it. So mostly we do naming. We do taglines also for companies. We also do what's called naming strategy work, which is typically talking to a company about how to name their portfolio if they have many products. Should the names relate to each other? Should they be completely different? Should they not have proprietary names for their products? That's naming strategy. And then we also do a lot of screening of the names, and screening involves checking trademarks, looking at domain name availability, but then also, as Deborah was just talking about, doing linguistic and cultural screening to make sure that the names don't mean something bad in another language, or that they're pronounceable, and maybe making sure that they're not already in use by perhaps a company like in China. If the name needs to work in China and there's already a big company with that name, you wouldn't want to use it. This is just a quick snapshot of the many clients that we've worked for. We haven't named all these companies, but we've done a lot of work for them. We have named a couple of them. Names you might be familiar with that we've done, if you know Fitbit, we didn't name Fitbit, but we've named all their devices. So if you see One and Zip and Flex and Blaze and all those things, we came up with those names. For Adobe, we came up with the name Elements for Photoshop. So they had Photoshop and we named it, excuse me, Elements, and Elements is also for some of their other things. We named Voodoo, we came up with that name. Clover Health, we came up with that name. Upwork, we named Upwork. So my job is different than the folks who have talked with you so far, except maybe Nancy, because I don't work for a big company, and I've never worked for a big company. Catchword is my company, so I'm the boss, which is pretty awesome. And for me, like Katie was saying, it took me a while to figure out what my personality was and what was going to work for me as an employee. So what I really like is not having someone telling me what to do. And I really like being able to manage my own time and my own priorities. And I also have a very short attention span. So I like projects that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then they're over. And I like doing new things all the time. So in a day, I talk to lots of clients. I'm very client-facing, so when people come to us and they need a name, I'll talk to them about it. I manage projects, so I'm the one who coordinates with our clients about when the meetings are going to be. I do interviews. When we're in a project and we're developing names, I review naming lists. So the creative team at my company generates hundreds and hundreds of names for anything that we happen to be naming. And then I'll start looking at those lists to pick the best names. I do trademark searching. I put together the presentations like this one for my clients when I have to present names to them. I actually do the name presentations, and that involves, it's very much like teaching. So you have a group of people in a room, you get up in front of them and you explain why these names are particularly good. And all of my linguistic training comes into play when I do that, and also my teaching experience, because I did a lot of TAing while I was here at Berkeley. I do a lot of pitching work to clients, so going in and explaining to them why they should hire us over some other company. And because the business is my business, I have to do everything else that's running a business. So that can mean writing out checks, it can mean checking the mail, it can mean making sure that we have good internet service, watering the plants, ordering office supplies. It's just everything. When you have a small business, somebody has to do that stuff, and it's you, or your partners. And emptying the trash, and making sure the door's locked, and updating the website and making sure the email is working. I happen to do a lot of the tech stuff for my company, so I'm constantly updating computers and installing software and fixing problems and things like that. So there's a lot of being your own boss that is not the work, it is making the work happen, even when you work at home. So pros and cons of what I do. The pros are that for me, it's really endlessly interesting. Every project is something new, it's something different, learning about new products, new clients, things that I've never learned about before. I get up to speed really quickly on new stuff, and I love it. The unpredictability for me is really important because when I start to do the same thing day after day, I get really bored. So I love just having a new project land in my lap and having to learn it and do it and see it through. It's great. I love being creative in certain ways, so I don't actually create a lot of the names that our company does. I do sometimes, but I'm creative in other ways, putting together presentations. I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of blogging, I do a lot of speaking, so going and talking to people about what our company does or issues related to naming. I talk to trademark lawyers occasionally. I love not having a boss, except for me and my partners. Having a partnership has its own challenges, but it's a lot more democratic because you can sit in a room with your partners and talk things out, and no one is telling you what to do. And I love seeing my work in public, so when I go to the store and I see the display of all the Fitbit devices, and I can look at them and go, I named all these, my company did all this work. Like, my family's so sick of it, because every time we go into Target, I'm like, let's go look at the Fitbit thing. And then, I'm in Starbucks, and they have a display of refreshers, and I'm like, look, we named that. And my husband's like, yes, I know, you told me. But it's awesome when you see a name that you helped create on a billboard, 20 feet high. That's pretty cool, pretty darn cool. The cons, it's unpredictable. So because our company does not have a steady stream of work from people, sometimes it gets a little nerve-wracking. If resources are low, there's not a lot of new work coming in, I have to go out and find work. I gotta go call people. I gotta set up lunches and take people out for coffee and try to drum up some work. So that can be quite stressful. Clients can be very difficult. I think I know what the best names are for my clients, and sometimes they don't agree with me. And I have to try to convince them. So you have to learn to work with people who may have a very different mindset than you, a different work schedule than you. You have to be very flexible when you work with clients. Managing employees is even more difficult than working with clients. So even though my company is quite small, we only ever have about 5 or 6 people total, and 2 of those are my partners. Just managing other people is hard, and making sure that they are working, that they're happy, that they're doing what they want to do, that they understand what their jobs are, and that you're training them properly in their work is a whole other skill. And when you work for a small company, Katie was talking about how your work hours can be really long. When you are the company, you're always at work. Like, you're never off. You have to check your email constantly. You have to be able to be on conference calls with people in Asia at 9 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning when it's on the East Coast. You're never really off the hook, even when you're on vacation. And that's a trade-off. So get to be your own boss, always at work. And for me, it actually works. For some people, it's not a good compromise. So finally, how does linguistics help me in my job? And for me, it's in everything that I do. So when I'm presenting names to clients, I can pretty much instantly kind of call on all of my linguistic training to talk about why a name might be good semantically, or syntactically, or phonetically, or why it just has a good euphony. It sounds really nice. And it's all training that I had when I was in school. If I'm creating names, I know how to put word parts together to make actual names, not just alphabet soup. When I am evaluating names, I'm pretty good at looking at a list and kind of picking out the best ones that are interesting, are pronounceable, that really kind of hit the sweet spot for what a client might be looking for. But I use all those tools and all the other aspects of the work too. When I'm writing, I call on my linguistic skills to write well, to analyze my writing, the writing that goes out on behalf of my company. I use it when I'm talking, when I have to deal with clients from another culture. We often deal with companies in Asia, and you have to just understand that they're not Americans and that you need to perhaps, talk slower in some cases or understand what the cultural norms are. You can't go in just expecting that they're going to be like a regular American company. And linguistics helps with all of that. Mostly I use my phonetics and my sociolinguistics when I'm doing these things, but I have to get into historical linguistics as well when clients want to know what's the etymology of this word. They ask me that on the fly in a meeting, and I can't just go to Google and look it up. A lot of times I can just tell them because I happen to know what it is. When I'm writing or talking about why names might succeed or why they might fail, historical linguistics comes into it as well. So naming isn't for everybody, and just because you're a linguist doesn't mean you can be a namer. There's a special talent that's required both for creating names and for evaluating names. But there's a lot of naming companies in the Bay Area. We're just one of many, and I have known several linguists who have gone on to have careers in naming, and they like it pretty well. So if you're at all interested in it, there are companies that you can work for that are larger than mine. There are freelance things that you can do. Often naming companies will hire freelancers to create names for the projects that they have. And if you do enough of those, you can kind of make a living doing that kind of thing. And if you really want to start your own company, I did it and you can too. So that's what I do. That's my career in naming as a linguist. And if you guys have questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. Whoa, lots of questions. You had your hand up first.
Sure. Asking for a friend.
Sure.
How, like when you're doing interviews or when, similar companies are doing interviews, what do you look for in a candidate? Is it sort of an innate ability? Is it, I guess, what is that process?
So the question is, when we are hiring, what do we look for? We look for a couple of things depending on the position. So if we're hiring someone to do creative work, I need to see names that have already been created. We would never hire somebody who hadn't actually named anything. So they have to have some track record, like I've been freelancing for 3 years and here's a good span of my work. We often give people a very quick naming test. So here's a brief, come up with 100 names and let me see what your work is like. On the other side, on the project management side, you need to have some client interface experience. Again, I would never hire someone who didn't have any experience at all. Teaching helps a lot. Other kinds of client-facing stuff also helps a lot. Good writing ability is also really important, and also being able to speak to a client in a way that's clear, concise, get your point across. I often advise people, if they're looking for a career in naming besides doing freelance work, definitely do some blogging or get published somewhere, even if it's not a paying published thing, just to show that you have some skill with words. It's really, really important in the branding industry to have some skill with words. And I think that's pretty much the same for most naming and branding companies. Yes?
You talked about when you're trying to convince a client that your name is the best name for their product. When you're doing that, how do you communicate the linguistic value of the name that you suggested without, I guess, boring them with linguistic jargon? Like, how do you know? Yeah.
That's an excellent question. So the question is, how do I convince a client that a name is really a good one, linguistically speaking? So here's a good example. So the name Voodoo up there, right? You guys might have seen that. So it's a movie streaming service. It started out as a box. Now it's just completely online. I think Walmart bought them. And when they came to us, they had a terrible name, and they wanted a better name. So their whole thing was that their service didn't have a delay. So when you clicked on it, your movie would start. It was like magic. So one of the creative directions that we explored was words around magic. And this was one of the names that we came up with. People know what voodoo is. There's some cultural connotations with it, which we thought were okay. They were all right with that. But we spelled it this way because it was shorter, 4 letters, easy to spell, easy to pronounce, consonant, vowel, which is really good. And they understand that. Like if you say it, consonant, vowel, they go, oh yeah, I understand. And it works pretty well cross-culturally. Those letters aren't too weird, so they work for English and other languages. V is a little bit uncommon, but that's all right. So that's the way I would explain it to a client. So I try not to use linguistic jargon unless I need to kind of without my credentials and go like, yeah, this is acoustically significant, and then they kind of back off. So it's handy to have that. No, I really, that's how you have to do it. And you have to gauge the client. Sometimes they're more educated and you can use more linguistic terms, and sometimes you just have to try to say it in as plain English as you possibly can. Okay, I think one more question. There were some people over here before. Anybody? I got it. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And now, our next speaker is Joe Dabney, who is a forensic linguist, but also a tech writer, and has done many, many other interesting things.
Yes, I do have two career paths. I'm identified as a technical writer and a forensic linguist. Let me talk to you about both of them and about my transition. First, technical writing. Tech writing includes all kinds of writing related to technical information. That's instructions, manuals, warning labels, data sheets, medicine labels, and so forth. Here in the orbit of Silicon Valley, most tech writers write about software and, to a somewhat lesser extent, hardware. And I've done both. In the industry, the preferred term is technical communication, which has broader implications that includes writing, but also things like editing, illustrating, managing a technical publications department, designing websites. All those sorts of things come under the category of technical communication. And there's a quick definition of the broader term, so I'll give you a moment to read that. There are a lot of English majors in the field, but I've also met a number of linguists who have turned to technical writing. This is probably because word people, you could call them, are attracted to both fields, to writing, to linguistics, to English. Since linguistics is your field of study, let me talk about what your knowledge can bring to the table. Linguists understand language more deeply than most writers, or even most English majors. Many people know how to write according to the rules of grammar they learned in grade school, and that's just fine. But linguists know about the research that goes a lot further. The descriptivist approach can uncover more rules about language than you're going to find in a grammar textbook. More important, research into how people understand language can help you write more effective documentation. This can be important because the stakes can be very high. Now, of course, you want your employer's customers to understand and how to use the product. But what are the products? Right now, I'm currently working on a software company in Alameda. Their software goes into cars and airplanes and spacecraft. Their software is on Mars. It really has to work, and the documentation for the programmers who work with it, they write their products or operating systems, really has to be accurate. You want to make really good documentation for a product like that. In another talk I give, I talk about an airplane crash where over 100 people were killed. And part of the blame for that crash was poor technical documentation. So there are reasons to get this stuff right. Your linguistic skills will help a lot in doing that. And unlike an English major, you know more than English. Even if you're monolingual, you know what kinds of issues can crop up in other languages. And this is helpful if you are writing material that will someday need to be translated. Now, if this is an area you want to go into, you're going to have to pick up some technical knowledge. You need to understand the technology you're going to be writing about. Now, you don't have to know it to the same level as the subject matter experts who work with it, like the engineers who produce the product, who are inventing it. You start with what I would call the concepts and buzzwords level, and then you learn the details about the product or project you're working on as you're working on it, but you need some basic knowledge. So that's a little bit about your field and your potential role in it, and let me tell you a little bit about my own career and my transition. I've been a technical writer since the mid-1990s, and after about 10 years in the field, I decided I wanted to do something more. I had started out writing system administrative manuals for the staff in a data center, and several years later, I was still writing system admin manuals. I wanted to get some more variety, some more credentials. And so I started looking around for a master's degree program. I found one I liked at Georgetown University, and its goal was pretty much the same as this event here. It was a master's degree program in linguistics for people who didn't necessarily want to become college professors. And I was not brand new to linguistics when I went into grad school. I had taken two classes in linguistics as part of my minor in communication arts at Holy Names in Oakland. But the master's degree opened up a whole new world. I loved it. I got a chance to be immersed in language studies. But then the question comes, what do I do with my degree in linguistics? And I did not know when I started. I was hoping I would find a new career path, and I did. A guest speaker in my sociolinguistics class was an FBI agent who talked about solving crimes using language. It was fascinating stuff. That was my introduction to forensic linguistics. I took a course at the next semester called Language and Law. It was about linguistics in the legal system. The first thing we did in the class was to study Supreme Court cases in which the justices were essentially doing linguistic analysis. They did it very badly. And I learned something intriguing. My instructor for that class did some side work analyzing contract language for businesses. And sometimes he served as an expert witness in court. And well, that sounded very interesting, like a very interesting thing to do. And I asked him, well, how much does it pay? Is it good? And the hourly rate for doing that is on a par with what my San Francisco lawyer charges me for work. So, this could be lucrative as well. I like that part. And it was in this class that I found a way to merge my two professional interests. My semester project was about jury instructions, because I saw writing jury instructions as a technical writing project. You needed to take the technical knowledge from the subject matter experts, in this case they were judges and law professors, and make it understandable to non-technical people, which is pretty much everybody else who never studied law but might end up on a jury. And technical writers know very well how to do that kind of translation. That's what we do all the time. As it happened, a few weeks after I graduated from Georgetown, the FBI agent co-taught one-week class in forensic linguistics at Hofstra University, so I took that class too, and I had a new career direction. And I'll give you a second to read this. What is forensic linguistics? But I ran into a snag. Forensic linguistics is big in Europe, especially in the UK. In the US, most of forensic linguistics are on the East Coast. But when I got back home to California and started talking to lawyers, they didn't know anything about linguistics. They didn't know where it fit into their world. So I have been trying to educate them. I give classes to lawyers. I'm giving another one next month that's going to focus specifically on discourse analysis in legal contexts. What I'm trying to do here is open up a new market for linguistics, for linguists, that maybe some of you can take advantage of in the future. Also, as far as I know, nobody in the US does forensic linguistics full-time. Many of them are college professors in their day jobs. Now, I've taught linguistics and I've taught technical communication at the college level, but it's not my regular job. My bread and butter is still technical writing. I like forensic linguistics because depending on the problem you need to solve, you can use any of the sub-disciplines of linguistics. I worked on a project recently that involved lexicography. I haven't studied that formally, but it was an interesting thing to do. Now here's some practical information from a career point of view for both fields. Being good at technical writing brings you, can get you steady work both in startups and in large corporations. And at least in the Bay Area, it pays well. And while language skills are important, the more technical you are, the more money you can make. Forensic linguistics is very different. It is, at least for now, a very small niche. But it's fascinating work and a chance to bring some more justice into the world, which I think is a good thing. And sometimes the stakes are high. I'm working on a case right now where a woman was convicted of murdering her baby grandchild. If this is a miscarriage of justice and she gets freed, I will be part of the reason that she did. In both fields, I'm a big fan of joining professional organizations. You get to learn what's going on in the field. You get to talk to experienced people who can tell you about jobs, tell you about what skills you need to build, things like that. Here are some that I recommend. The Society for Technical Communication is the largest organization for technical writers and people in related fields. And I will give a plug for my local STC chapter, the Berkeley chapter. Despite its name, it really covers the greater Oakland-Berkeley area. And we meet once a month with a guest speaker at a country club in the Oakland Hills, not far from here. More details are on the website, stc-berkeley.org. For forensic linguistics, you want to know about the International Association of Forensic Linguists. They have an academic journal, the International Journal of Forensics of Language and the Law. And they have academic conferences every 2 years in a different city each time. Last year it was in China. Next year it will be in Portugal. And if your specialty is phonetics or phonology, you want to learn about the International Association for Forensic Phonetics and Acoustics. I am not very familiar with them, but I do know they exist. That's all I could fit into 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop there. But I will mention one other thing. I'm going to take a cue from Nancy and say that my current project is ending in December, and I want to look for something exciting to do in January. Questions? Yes?
Can you give an example of the kind of analysis that you might do as a forensic linguist?
An example of the kind of analysis I would do for forensic linguistics? Yes, there was a very fascinating one on the case I'm working on. There was a case, one of the reasons the woman was convicted was one witness statement was that when the woman was in the hospital, she got the news that the baby was was being taken off life support. The nurse testified that she had said, mea culpa, mea culpa. And the defense lawyer said, oh, you know that's a prayer, right? When she testified to that. Well, would not be my first question is, are you sure she said that? Yeah. What I had to do for that is first figure out what she probably said, which was, es mi culpa, Spanish, because she was a Spanish speaker, and go into what that might mean if she had said that, but also because it was already in the testimony that she had said mea culpa. What is mea culpa? And it is, so that's where I did the lexicographical work. What does mea culpa mean? It's actually part of English now, and it means an apology, or, you know, he had to send a mea culpa because he forgot the meaning, something like that. It's usually for a minor transgression. And it's already in the testimony that in the what the lawyer said, it's a prayer. Well, what does it mean in the context of the prayer? So I had to figure out what does it mean in that context, and it does not mean, it's not the same as confessing to the crime. It means whatever I did wrong, it's my fault, I can't blame someone else. Yes?
So in forensic linguistics, how necessary is a background law, or is it at all?
It is not necessary because you are an expert witness, you are not a lawyer. You're there to analyze the evidence from a linguistic point of view. The lawyers, the jurors, the judge, they look at the legal aspects of it. You just answer the questions related to the language. No more questions? Thank you.
We have one more speaker scheduled, but I'm not sure he's here yet. Mark, are you here? Okay, he said he was going to come a little bit late, so I think for the next maybe 10 minutes or so, we'll vamp a little bit, and we'll take some questions.
I have two things.
Yes,
Can I do that?
please. And I wanted to mention one thing to follow on what Joe was saying. I've done expert witness testimony as well, and it was super interesting. I had to write a couple of briefs for a lawyer because they were defending their trademark against someone else who had a very similar mark. So I had to talk about whether the words were the same in meaning, but also whether the words were visually close to it. So if you looked at it quickly, could you think that the competitor name was similar to the original mark holder's name? And that was cool. And then when I had to testify in a trial, it was one company accusing another company of stealing their look and feel. So it was more about branding, but it also had to do with the language that they used on their website. And it was like TV. It really was. Like, you got sworn in and you stood there and there was the jury and you got asked a bunch of questions. And it was really interesting. I think you have to have a certain kind of personality for that. I personally love getting up and talking in front of people, so for me it was really cool. I loved it. Okay. Yes? And we do have one more person who's here as a socializer for afterwards, who is Misha, who's sitting in the second row. And he's not going to be speaking, but he will be available as a resource to everybody. And he'll say a few words. Yeah, come on.
So I want to give a further response. I think it was you who asked the question about how do I use linguistics in my daily work. And as I've been listening to other people, I thought I could add and embellish a little bit more. Namely, I learned about psycholinguistics and sociolinguistics and anthropological linguistics, all of which come in every day. So I am constantly running quasi-experiments where there are actual people who I'm talking to. And so my stance with them and my listening abilities with them and responding to what they're saying about the objects that we're talking about is very important. And I bring all of that kind of knowledge and training to the tasks that I've taken up. The second thing I wanted to say very quickly, and we can talk about this more in the discussion period, is we also have, besides the LSA SIG and the presence of that SIG on Facebook, we have another group which was developed starting with when the LSA Institute was at Stanford several years ago, and that's called the Bay Area Industrial Linguists. And I think there are a couple members of that group here, and that abbreviates to BAIL, right? And you can imagine that it could be regional elsewhere. But since it's only an online group, anybody from anywhere, including the people who are watching the stream, could join that group. And that's a place where we haven't exhausted it or used it even very fully. We haven't talked enough about job opportunities, job advice, different dilemmas, conferences coming up where you spoke or what you want to speak about. Here's a problem I'm trying to solve. Is there somebody else who has done this before? And I'm a member of several other groups like that, but that's one specifically where I know everybody has some kind of linguistics background. BAIL. It's a Google group.
And
sorry, one thing I was going to mention that I totally forgot is get on LinkedIn, get your profile going, and talk to people on LinkedIn.
Connect to each other.
Connect to us. I can't tell you how wonderful it's been and how, like, I met Laurel that way. I've spoken with someone at Eat My Words. I've spoken with people at Lexicon Branding. I'm meeting with 2 people at Google on Monday, all because I just reached out to them and just said, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm interested in, would you like to chat? So go out there and reach out. People are willing to be more helpful than you expect, and then, you know, be willing to take their words back if they need help from you. But people are so willing, and if they don't respond, they don't respond, but most people will. So really, work on your LinkedIn profile.
Yes, great advice. So I'd just like to open it up to other questions for me or for any of our panelists today. Yeah?
My name is Michael. It's a global question to all the speakers, actually. So as we all know, linguistics isn't like something like engineering, where in college you obtain a technical skill that you then practice and train and apply that exact technical skill post-graduation. So in what ways have you, all the speakers, found best to prepare for going into the workforce with linguistic skills? Or is it more that in the other tangentially related things that you've done throughout your time as a student, that those have ended up developing into skills that you've then been able to utilize in your careers?
So the question, I think, is how do you prepare as a linguist to go out and get a job as a linguist? And do you rely more on other skills that are non-linguistic to help you get those jobs? Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, while utilizing the non-quantifiable skills
Yeah.
that the linguists develop.
It's tough because linguistics can be very specific, right? Like you can have a really sharp skill in one area, but there's no jobs for that particular skill. I think everybody will have a different answer. Mine is that none of my specific skills, like what I was doing in phonetics was looking at phonemes and whether phonemes are real, right? John O'Hall is really interested in whether phonemes are real, and I wanted to do a cross-linguistic experiment about that. My job doesn't do anything with that, but I've used all of the knowledge of phonetics and how words get put together and how language works, and also my sociolinguistic training in how people interact with language. All of my other skills came into play as well. Like I'm a pretty good writer. I'm a pretty good speaker. I did well as a teacher. So those things helped a lot. I don't think there's any one thing that you can do. It's kind of, there's a position out there probably for you, or sometimes you have to make it. We were talking about this at the SIG meeting in our last LSA, and our catchphrase for that was, you need a linguist for that. Because often you see a situation at a company where they're having some language issue, and that's what you think, right? You need a linguist to solve that problem. Sometimes that's what you need to do, is go to a company and go, I'm a linguist, I can solve your problem. And show them that you can solve that problem using your linguistic skill, and then they'll create a position for you. So sometimes it's not applying for a position, it's making that position real. And lots of people have done that. Anybody else want to talk about your own experience? I'll just hand the microphone. Nancy, you look like you have something to say.
I must have something to say. Let's see. I think, well, let's see. How did I get my first job at IBM? That may be useful, right? I qualified for, let me get up here where you can see me. I applied for a job which the title was Discipline Specialist for the Humanities. Now, can't you just see me in leather and boots, high boots, form-fitting? I was skinnier then, but that wasn't what they thought it was. And I qualified because I had a PhD in linguistics. That was, I had a PhD in a field that you could consider a humanities field. I was then on the IBM side of transactions with universities. I was not carrying an order deck. I had salespeople who would go on those calls. But I remember the first call we made at one very large university, which will go unnamed, and we were calling on the Medieval and Renaissance Studies Institute. And the director, who was very familiar with the guy that I was working with, was out of town. So we were talking to the 4 staff who worked for him. And we sat down, and they said to us, what kind of medieval and Renaissance studies software does IBM offer? And I looked at Chuck, and he looked at me. I said, you want to go first? You want me to go first? He says, oh, I'll go first. I said, great. He says, IBM is in the business of helping you solve problems. We don't pretend we know about medieval and Renaissance studies, but, and then we went on and talked about what other universities were doing in this field and how they could talk to them and get some ideas and developing courseware and blah, 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 blah. But it was a wonderful place where you had to just, I will also recommend improv classes. If you are not comfortable with public speaking yet, take improv, because you will need all those skills. People will do things that you don't expect, and you need to remain poised and calm. I see some nods around the room, and I don't know if that means you've taken improv or yes, you've heard this advice before. Others want to join in? That was just one example.
So to answer your question, I just want to say that it is entirely possible to have a career as a linguist outside of academia. So yes, you can major in engineering and get a job as an engineer, and that's a much easier path, but you can also major in linguistics and have a career as a linguist in industry. One of my former coworkers at Google has now had 4 successive positions at different companies around the world where her title was linguist or linguistic analyst. You can do it. It's not easy to find those opportunities. It's certainly not as easy as finding computer science positions, but you can. And even if you don't find those positions always open to you, you have lots of other skills that will let you write your own story. You don't have to pursue anything with the word linguist in it in order to use those skills.
I also wanted to say, just before I forget, before you take the mic, one of the things that the SIG would really like to do is to provide some really tactical help for people. So when you put your resume together, how do you frame the work that you've done in linguistics in a way that would be attractive to employers? And sometimes it's just a matter of changing your the way you phrase things. So rather than saying, you know, I did this experiment, say I managed a project. That's what people want to hear. That's what employers are used to hearing, words like I managed something or I had a project, rather than I ran an experiment, because that doesn't kind of translate into business speak so well. So there are some small things like that, and we're trying to figure out how to help people, but there is a certain way to craft your linguistic experience in a way that employers will understand it as showing that you've done some really amazing work. So we're working on that.
So I do want to say one thing is that, at least from my experience talking to software engineers that I work with, it's actually, you shouldn't be too worried about the fact that it seems like people who take an engineering or science track get to just execute on what they learned in school in the job. Turns out that a lot of software engineering jobs look nothing like the computer science coursework that you do at university. So it's not really, it may not be as dissimilar as an experience of someone who studied linguistics or social science. Another thing is that you'll find specific instances that maybe the kinds of experiences at your work where you find your linguistic training coming in handy. For example, you might work with a lot of people from many different backgrounds, linguistic, cultural backgrounds, and as a linguist, you are more aware of all the different ways that misunderstandings can happen. Linguistic, different communicative styles, different dominant senses of words that people like to use, and so it's not part of the job description that you help your team communicate better, but it is something that as a linguist you can do. You can be a better communicator, you can help resolve disputes that's come up more than once in my personal experience. And another thing is you have experience, for example, if you do a lot of linguistic coursework, you have experience seeing, working with a lot of data, you take a historical linguistics course, you have, hundreds of words, and you have to somehow keep them all in your head. And then the next week you have another assignment, and it builds off the previous one. And you kind of get this, you just develop habits for looking at a bunch of data, a bunch of stuff that doesn't seem very structured, and kind of getting a feeling of what is probably interesting, what's worth spending your time on going deeper, versus what seems like maybe it's not that interesting, you can wait to look at it later. That happens a whole lot. It helps you with prioritizing your tasks for a given day. It helps with, if you have a bunch of people who are asking you to help them with some project, taking a look at each one of them and seeing which ones of these can I spend a little bit of time and help the person, and then buy myself some time to look deeper into something else. So I think those general kinds of skills do come in handy a lot, probably no matter what kind of job you have, but yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, so I don't think Mark is here yet, unless he is. He said he was coming a little bit later, so I'm trying to hold the spot, because I would love for you guys to hear him talk. But before we do that, we have Misha Pardu, who works for H5, and he's going to say a few words about what he does.
So I decided, whoa, that's very loud. I decided not to go into much detail or be on the official panel about my job, but I did come here because I wanted to say some very specific things about the human side of interviewing and trying to bridge this gap between your academic experience and the corporate world. And this is something that we haven't talked about too much today, but any of us who worked outside of academia have experienced it very well. And this is almost especially for those of you who are past the BA stage. You may be past the MA stage, working on your PhD for a long time. It's kind of easy to fall into that world, and it's a little bit hard to get out. Those of us who took a long time in grad school, such as myself, I think it took me nearly 8 years to finish my PhD since the time I started in 2002 here, and then finished in 2010. So, thank you. So I work at a company called H5 in the legal tech industry, legal search consulting. It's a very cool job. I don't want to talk about the specifics here today, but just to say that it might be a little more corporate, a little less academic and nerdy than some jobs. Not to say that you can't go there and have a lot of fun with fellow linguists, being a language nerd, but just that there are some things that I wish some of our people knew before they came and interviewed with us, because I think they'd be more successful, and I think this probably applies to a lot of companies. And so one of these things is when you join a company in a very services-oriented industry, what primarily matters is, can everyone work together as a tight-knit team? Can we provide these services on really tight deadlines? How do we all get along? Does everyone understand what the agenda is, what we're doing? And so when you're presenting yourself in that situation, it's not the same as trying to get into grad school. So one of the ways that you can get into grad school at a place like Stanford or whatever in linguistics is to have a really impressive set of research ideas, right? Like, I want to study this, and the other thing, and I have these amazing plans to do so, right? And presenting yourself and your personal story and your personal agenda can be very effective when trying to become a PhD student, for example. And in fact, you probably won't get into grad school unless you can do some of that. So that's a important skill. When you're trying to get a job in a corporate environment with a bunch of people just trying to get through the work as quickly and as efficiently as possible, they may not really be that interested in hearing about your personal research agenda. So it's really important to do the research about the company you're trying to join. You need to understand what is it they do on a day-to-day basis. You need to do whatever you can to find out, including through personal connections and people you may know who already work there. And you want to talk about, okay, what is it that this team values? Because everyone is just human. The people who are interviewing you are peering at you wondering, are you someone who we could just work with on a day-to-day basis. Like, what do you like as a person? What do you like in terms of how you get us and get our work culture? And you need to broadcast that knowledge. You need to seem like someone who fits in when you're doing that interview. You need to basically seem like you're ready to be a cog in their machine and, you know, just fit in. And so the more you do that research ahead of time, the better off you'll be. And so essentially, this is not something to, you know, take lightly when you're trying to get into the corporate world. But it is something that's difficult to do if you've been like a PhD student just working on research for your whole life. So that was the main thing I wanted to say.
And now, we have our last speaker. Yeah, thanks, Misha. That was great. So here he is, the man we've all been waiting for. This is Mark Ettinger, and he is a research scientist. Hold it right up.
Okay. Hey everybody, thank you for waiting. Sorry for the delay. I had Saturday was soccer game day for the children. So they're still in uniform. Didn't even have time to go home. My name is Mark Ettinger. I did my PhD here, and my focus was on phonetics and phonology, and I did some psycholinguistics research here at Berkeley. Afterwards, I actually did a postdoc at Northwestern in neuroscience. And so being a linguist, the tools that it provided me with, and I'll tell you what I ultimately use those tools for, was a lot of analytical ability. And in every job that I've had, I've been trying to sell people on this ability to take things like data you get from in phonetics or psycholinguistics, thank you, and to find generalizations, find interesting things from those data. So the first thing I did after my postdoc is I worked for the Department of Veteran Affairs. And one thing I don't think they are particularly aware of in fields like linguistics is there's a large infrastructure in the United States for doing research, supported by things like the Department of Veteran Affairs, NIH, Department of Education. There's a lot of money there that is being spent doing research on things that actually touch on linguistics. So a colleague of mine, for example, is what's called a program officer for the Department of Education, and she manages a portfolio of grants that go out to academia, so it's sort of tangential to academia, but you don't necessarily need a PhD to do that sort of stuff. Or if you do have a PhD, you don't necessarily have to just be in a tenure track job. This position at the VA was also it was research oriented, but it was supported by funding from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Specifically, the research that I was doing was trying to understand how things like traumatic brain injury impacts speech. So that's one career path that might not be, that you guys might not be aware of. Places like NIH, these government agencies that look for people with strong analytical abilities and some subject knowledge, but it's not necessarily quite the corporate world. It's somewhere in between academia and industry. While I've been there, I've had a couple of really cool opportunities that I want to share with you as well, particularly in the Bay Area. I think as many of the people talk about, there's a tremendous amount of technology research. I gotta avoid, all right, I have to put it to the side so I don't do the pee-popping, right? I should know that as a linguist. So there are a lot of startups. I think, sorry, my kids are trying to distract me. There are a lot of startups. It's like if you live in the Bay Area and you haven't at least interacted with a startup, it's like, you're not here, you haven't been here long enough. So I've had an opportunity to work with a number of startups where I've been able to use my linguistic skills. One of them was, just to give you a little bit of detail, it was this company called the Cognitive Healthcare Company, and what we were trying to do is develop mobile-based apps for the assessment of cognitive health, and part of that is analyzing linguistic data, both phonetically, syntactically, and lexically. And so there are a lot of companies, there's websites like AngelList, and things like that, where you can find companies that are looking for people with linguistic skill, in many cases. A lot of times it is focused on natural language processing, right? Which you may have heard about a lot about that today. Or okay, so natural language processing is sort of figuring out how to get a computer to understand or parse through language, which is the computer science department, for example. I think at Berkeley, it's more so the computer science department that focuses on that. It's less emphasized in linguistics, at least when I was here. That is a very easy job to find in the Bay Area. But you don't even need that specific computational skill to still be able to apply your linguistic knowledge for these startups. They're trying to figure out what to do with speech. Internet of Things, chatbots, these are all trendy tech topics. And so your linguistics background is going to be very useful for that. Mine turned out to be for this startup. Didn't get funding, but that's a whole other story. And then another startup I'm working with is doing something similar in the finance industry. So it is trying to basically get a computer to look at articles and figure out whether the article is saying a good thing about a stock or a bad thing about a stock. So that is, again, in this big world of computers and language, that is something that I'm able to do because of my linguistics background. And then the final thing I would add is I'm actually about to make a career transition. And there are these programs out there that take people with a less quantitative or computational background and train them to be things like data scientists. And so this is what I was talking about earlier at the beginning, doing phonetics and psycholinguistics gave me a very strong analytic and data analytics background. So I can take a bunch of data, compare distributions, do statistical tests, make pretty graphs, all that sort of stuff. That is now this very trendy, important skill in the corporate world that falls under the rubric of data science. So depending on how much of that you're able to do within linguistics, like if you took, I don't know if it's undergrad allowed, but there's a statistics for linguistics class that Keith Johnson teaches, for example, or is taught. So if you have those sorts of skills, then that is immediately transferable to data science, and you can basically call yourself a data scientist and start looking at those jobs. Or if you don't quite have those skills, there are these training programs that they offer in Galvanize is one of the companies that does it. There's one called the Data Incubator, which I did, which offer fellowships. They train you for free. There's another one called Insight Data Science. So these are programs to help train you, to give you job-specific skills if you don't feel like you quite have the computational or the statistical knowledge to do all that sort of stuff. So that's what I did. And so now I'm actually starting this new job where I'll be, again, able to use my quantitative and linguistic skills, where we are trying to sort of figure out what is happening on a web page linguistically, and also image processing and video processing to sort of say, hey, would an advertiser want to put an advertisement for Bernie Sanders on a web page about Donald Trump or something? So it's a very valuable piece of information that companies want to know. And obviously, the natural language processing and data analysis is a key part of that. So that is all I had to share about. Yeah, okay. Who has questions? Yes?
Can you talk more about that transition to the data science using your linguistic skills if you're less heavy on the techie skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, of course. So there are these programs, and obviously if you're doing linguistics, you can have very different skill sets already. So even if you're doing something like syntax or phonology, you do think about things in an analytic way that is pretty closely tied to that. But if you're doing sociolinguistics, it might require even more training. But basically, these programs take anyone, and there are different courses. They're generally these 2-month programs where they'll teach you how to program, teach you how to code, and then teach you how to code for doing data analysis. And they're very popular in the Bay Area because there's this shortage of data scientists, and there is this excess of smart people without jobs. So it's, you know, if you think about, if you're interested in economics and market and efficiencies, it's filling this need to transition the workforce into what's needed, which is sort of these people that are able to analyze data in a computational way. So as I mentioned, so that if you search for it, if you do, I think if you just Google, there's many, many, many of these companies. If you Google data science training, probably, in maybe San Francisco, it'll give you, and actually if you would like, actually I made a spreadsheet when I was hunting them down, and I can share that spreadsheet with you. They vary in duration, they vary in how much they cost. Some of them offer fellowships, they offer location, some of them are live, some of them are like virtual, like MOOCs. What does MOOC stand for? Massive online something course. So there's a tremendous amount of variety. Just if you want to jot down some names, Galvanize, Metis is one. The Data Incubator, I mentioned that one. Insight Data Science is another one. And I have a spreadsheet with many more. So, lastname@gmail.com, if you'd like a copy of that. And I'll erase my notes that are personal to me before I share that. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Following from that, my name is Megan, thank you.
Hi, Megan.
I guess the question is, how much of your, it's probably hard to tell because you haven't started it yet, but how much of your new job with this data analysis focus do you expect to still contain linguistic analysis?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I don't know if this was talked about at all, if this was touched on, but in the industry world, and I think Misha was talking about this a little bit, and Russell may have talked about it, I'm not sure. In the industry world, you kind of want to get results and get it, sometimes you just want down and dirty results that just work, and you don't want to necessarily do things right for all cases. And so it is a big change in thinking. So for example, in sentiment analysis, which is trying to look at a web page and say, is this a positive web page or a negative web page? That's something that companies obviously care about. If you were to really do it, if you were to think about it as like a linguist that very much cares about syntax and semantics, you might want to take every single sentence, figure out the syntax, figure out the semantics, figure out what every sentence says, put them all together into a discourse, and really understand what the page says, right? But what we do is we just look at the words, one word at a time, and we say, you look at the word good, you look at the word, word ugly, we look at every single word as an individual word. We do a few tricks here and there to like simulate syntax, and we get a number. And the important thing is getting that number. So being aware of the problems that approach will have is very useful. So why just counting the words is a problem? Well, you might have sarcasm, you might have negation, all those sorts of things. And how can you compensate for that in a clever way without having to solve syntax, right? So that, in that way, having that linguistic knowledge is very useful, but there's a lot of, in the industry world, there's a lot of shortcuts, because we just need to get something to work, and get it to work now, and we need an actual number. Not like, this is how we would get the number, we need the actual number. Yeah?
So just to follow from that, with that specific example, so then are you saying that you might develop somebody mentioned earlier about weighting different things, like you might develop the system that weights that number and sarcasm, like you might incorporate that in an operationalized way?
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what you're going to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much in the weeds and how much in the details you want me to get, but basically, some people already do this. You go hop on the web and you can Google, sentiment analysis, and there's a million startups, a million sort of libraries that do it. But then let's say you want to do sentiment analysis. So for example, one thing that's interesting is when you look at the words used in movie reviews, and you have you can figure out if they're positive or negative by the number of stars, versus restaurants, it's like a very different vocabulary. Interestingly, maybe not obviously, but interestingly. And if you think about it, it makes sense. So basically, everything that you're measuring sentiment of, you might need to build a new vocabulary, right? So there's good and bad, but then there's words, oh, there was a great word that I thought of the other day that was like, meant the exact opposite in cuisine versus a movie in terms of whether it was a good word or bad word. So building, so one thing that I'll be doing is like building new dictionaries. How do we build a new dictionary on the fly for a domain that we don't know about? Or, you know, in finance, for example, yet another domain where the words might have a very different meaning in those different contexts. And then implementation is big. How do we get it to run? How do we get it to run fast? How do we get it to run across in a parallel way so that you can do it, you know, on the order of many millions of pages? And then hooking that into, and I'm doing stuff that I'm not really an expert in, but I'll have to figure it out, like images. So how do we find out whether an image is a good image or a bad image? Or might we want to extract text from an image and look at that as well? So those are some of the details. And I'm happy to talk more in great length about the details of what I'll be doing. That's the general gist. Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, just a few words before we go. Thank you all for attending today. There are some refreshments in the hall out there. There's some cookies and some water, so please feel free to join. Our speakers are going to stick around for as long as they can, so you can ask them and get into the weeds on some of this stuff if you want. This is not a job fair. Please don't ask people for a job. It's a networking opportunity for sure, but please don't ask anyone for a job. Finally, please join the LSA. There's the discount. Enterprising gets you 15% off. There's a sign-in sheet on the table. We'd just like to collect information about who came. Don't worry, we're not going to sell your email address to anybody. And if you can, join the Facebook group. And if you're coming to LSA in January, please come to the Mixer. We would love to see you again. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
What is this bar for? Most of the videos there, like, it's just still live.